Hello, happy Friday. Welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The FCC has announced a new round of RDOF awards. These are actually authorized. So these are not ready to authorize, but these are actually authorized, meaning that everybody's completed the steps that they need to complete in order to get their funds. And we'll be looking at that here in just a minute. Stand by. Thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Broadband Deployment News. And RDOF, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, is a fund of broadband dollars that are coming out right now. It's from a reverse auction that took place a couple of years ago, where service providers themselves, the operators, actually they bid for how much support they would accept in a particular area. It was a reverse auction, meaning they were bidding for how little support they would accept, and whoever would accept the least amount of support are the ones that won that. Lots of bidders. And the FCC just released a new round of funds that are going to be distributed to 33 providers, and two of them, Time Warner and Charter, are really big winners in this, in that they had a lot of particular areas that they bid on that they won. So we'll take a look at some of those numbers. It's really interesting because a couple of days ago I did a broadcast about some ready to authorize RDOF awards, meaning that they still had one step to go. So basically the FCC comes out and they'll list a bunch of winning bids, people that have completed their long form application, and they have like just really one more step, really two steps to then be authorized, and that's to file a letter of credit and then something regarding bankruptcy, I guess, if that were to occur. So they've got a couple of forms they need to get in there. Once they get that into the FCC, they have a deadline, like the deadline on these ready to authorize ones that came out a week or so ago. The deadline is March 24th for them to get that paperwork in. And they obviously want to get that paperwork in. There are some significant fines on any defaults. So it's most likely that those that are ready to authorize will be authorized once that comes out. You don't know for sure, though. I'm not sure how that's working specifically. And I still need to find out. I've got a call in the FCC. I'm trying to figure out what happens if you default. Is it really that much money? Because if you default, it's $3,000 per location. You'll see how many locations there are for some of these. And what's really interesting, again, is like Time Warner was, I think both Time Warner and Charter had some areas that they were defaulted on in this last announcement. And when they do the ready to authorize, they also do those that were not ready and that the bids defaulted on. And according to the FCC report and order, it's $3,000 per location. And that's, again, could be lots of locations. So I'm trying to find out about that. I'm also trying to find out what happens when an area is in default, and then what's the next step? Does the FCC contact other people that bid on that area? Or is it just open for other people to realize they can, it's public notice, so they can go in and see where it's defaulted and they can go in and try to bid? I'm not sure that's going to be done. So I'll try to get an answer on that, but I could not get an answer in time for this today. But so I wanted to show the news here, and then also I took some time to do a breakdown of the numbers. So stick around for that, because there's, when you get these public notices and the big long list of winners, it's hard to go through there and figure out how much everybody won. But I did go ahead and put those numbers together. So here's the public notice. So RDOF fund support authorized for 5,657 winning bids. So that's, each bid is in a census block group, I believe. So it sounds like a lot of bids, but it's smaller areas. And one thing I wanted to point out here was the service milestones. So now that these folks have won, they've got a certain amount of time to get a certain percentage of this broadband network up in these areas that they won. So after 3 years, starting December 31st, 2025, they need to have 40% of all the locations in that particular area up and running. And then a year later, 60%, and then it's going to be another 20% basically for the next few years. And then this money is allocated over 10 years. So they do have some milestones that they have to reach, and that starts in the third year with 40%. There's also a note here, they've got some reporting they've got to do. Long form applicants authorized in this notice will be required to file their first annual Section 54.13 report by July 1st, 2023. So they've got that pending out there. They must also test and certify compliance with relevant performance requirements in section 54.805 of the Commission's rules on an annual basis. So they need to do performance testing on this. They've got to test things like speed and latency, because one of the things, and I'll show this towards the end, is there were speed and latency tiers that they could bid in, and since they bid and said that they would go ahead and meet those, they've got to do these performance tests every year. There's also another report here that's due by October 1st, 2023, about high cost. Let's see, that state must certify the support recipient's behalf that all federal high cost support provided within the state was used in the preceding calendar. Anyway, I'll link to where you can download this notice, as well as you'll be able to download. I'll link to where you can download this as well. And this is the big long list of winners, and you can see why there's so many bids that were considered won. So basically, each operator on here is the minimum area that you bid on is a census block group, and then there's a certain number of eligible census blocks within there. And if you're going to bid on a census block group, you've got to cover every eligible census block in there. So there was this first group, for example, for Beacon Broadband. There's one census block group. It had 8 eligible census blocks, and in those 8 blocks, there's 175 locations, or basically places where broadband can be installed, that were not meeting the minimum of 25 by 3. And then you can see the winning bid amount, and this is an amount over 10 years. So you can see this is just Beacon Broadband here, and you can see they've bid on all these census blocks, and there's a certain number of eligible census block groups. There's a certain number of eligible census blocks within there. Then within each census block, there's a certain number of locations, and you can see that's just Beacon Broadband right there. Then you've got Bright House, same thing. So you had Beacon Broadband, they were bidding in Oregon. You've got Bright House, they were bidding in Florida. And again, they've got a whole bunch of census blocks that they've been on, even more right there for them. So you see this is still all Bright House here as I scroll on down. And then you've got Cable South, and then we get into the middle of this, and again, I'll show a summary of this information here in just a moment, not to make you sick by scrolling, but here you got Charter, okay, and you got Charter in Alabama. You see all those locations: Charter in Georgia, Charter in Michigan, Charter Missouri, so all kinds of locations. Then you got Time Warner, so those are the 2 big guys, Time Warner and Charter, and then you had others. So in fact, we'll take a look at those now. So I went ahead and exported this as best I could into a spreadsheet. Had to rearrange some things so that it all made sense, and then I took some totals. So here, for example, you've got Time Warner Cable, and this is how they're listed on there: Time Warner Cable Information Systems. And here's the states. So again, if you look back here, I like this Charter. So I just looked at the states, but for Time Warner, same thing. They had certain states that they bid on Charter at certain states. So Time Warner had the most amount of money. So you got California, Indiana, Kentucky, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Mexico. Just realized I don't have my mic pinned to me. So I'm going to do that just so the sound is maybe a little bit better. It was probably not great sitting over there at the desk. So you've got North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Texas. And then you can see here the number of census block groups. So remember, each one of those was 1, right? So each census block group has a certain number of eligible census blocks in it. So they bid on 1,969 census block groups. This is Time Warner. 41,512 census blocks were in that. And within there's 363,225 locations that they're going to build broadband to. So the total money they're getting for that, this is over 10 years, is $439,860,607. And then if you divide that amount of money by the number of locations, basically they're getting a little over $1,200 per location. And this is to build out to that location. So it might cost more than that, but this is how much they accepted for support. So maybe it's twice that it's going to cost Time Warner in order to build out to that location on average, but at least they're getting, let's say if that's the case, they're getting 50% of that covered by these funds. And these funds, by the way, come from the USF. So this is from the Universal Service Fund. It's paid, the FCC did this auction, and USAC are the people that manage the USF, or the Universal Service Fund. And that's that I think it's maybe up to $4 to $5 now, it might even be higher, on your phone bill that you pay, and that is meant to provide, originally was meant to provide telephone service in rural areas, but now it's all shifted to broadband. And they need to rearrange that so that they're actually collecting that probably from broadband dollars and not your landline phone, because there's so few of those now. So here you see again, that's 1,200, and it's interesting, Charter, also some different states, Alabama, Georgia, Illinois, Louisiana, Michigan, Missouri, Oregon, Tennessee, Wisconsin, Virginia, Montana, and Washington. And they bid on 1,520 census block groups, and out of that there's 39,000, almost 40,000 eligible census blocks. They got 973 locations there. And then you see they've got a pretty good amount of money here as well, 412 million, 58,595, and amazingly close on the average amount per location. Then you have Cable South Media. They bid on 3 states, Arkansas, Iowa, Mississippi. And you can see here a big drop here, only 161 census block groups. So that's 6,273 census blocks. And that translates to 57,387 locations that they're going to be providing service for. And you can see the amount they got, 152 million, 152.8, and $2,664 per location. Now the amount per location is going to vary here. You'll see some cases it's quite a bit higher, and in some cases it's very low. And I don't know if that's just a factor of the bidding, because if you've got a lot of people bidding in an area, that's going to bring the price down. The more people that were bidding, it was like, you were bidding basically a reverse auction. You're bidding how little you would accept. And there's a clock that goes on. I'll explain a little bit of that here in a minute. There's a clock that goes, and each round the numbers go lower and lower, and that's whoever's left at the end is who wins, basically. So that's one reason I think that you see the difference. It could also be some of these areas may be higher cost, and there was a premium if you got more money if you were bidding in a very high cost area. So that may account for some of that. You've got Zip Lead Fiber. They're in Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. 165 census blocks, 2,269 census blocks, 165 census block groups. Again, that's the big group, and then you've got census blocks within that, and you've got locations within that census block. 21,000 locations, and they got 57 million approximately. You can see they're very close as well here to that one above them, $2,600 basically per location. We had this company called Computer 5, and you can see what they got here. They were at $3,800 per location, almost $3,900, and that's for 12,000 plus locations that they bid on. We got Pearl River Valley Communications, they're Mississippi. The Computer 5 was in Washington. These guys, 45 census block groups, about 15,000 locations, and 1,678. So you can see quite a difference there in the amount of support that they're going to get to do that. And you've got Next in Arkansas, 9,400 or so locations, and they're at 2421. You've got Bright House in Florida, 16,000 plus locations, and they're at 1,258 per location. Armstrong in Pennsylvania, 8,500 locations, they're at 2,200. So you can see these numbers vary quite a bit. And you got Beacon Broadband, that was the first one on the list alphabetically in Oregon, 14 million that they got total for $4,498 per location. So again, this is Oregon. That's 3,141 locations. So these guys did pretty good. And again, I'm not sure why their number was so high. Maybe there weren't as many people bidding in that area, or maybe these are high cost areas. CVEC Fiber, looks like 8,200 or so locations, $1,674. So you can see a big difference there, 4,000, 1,000. Then we're back up to 4,000 here with Techno Communications in Mississippi, $4,000. And you got Snake River Solutions, $6,815. So they have 2 census blocks that they bid in, and there were 209 locations, 209 census blocks, excuse me, 2 census groups, hard to remember, 2 census groups, 209 census blocks, 1,606 locations in those census blocks, about 10 million, almost $11 million, and then $6,815 per location that they're getting to build out there. Tom Bigby Fiber, I mentioned them in the last, it was yesterday actually, I was talking about EMCs yesterday and how they're really positioned well to deliver broadband to their areas, and that's through both RDOF, and I'm sure they're anticipating the funds that are going to be coming out from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And Tom Bigby was one that was listed that they interviewed to find out, hey, how have things improved in your area since you've deployed broadband? And I think they deployed it back in 2017. They've been doing fiber a long time, but I think they started doing fiber to their customers back in 2017. And Steve Foshee from Tom Bigby was talking about how he was surprised how quickly the changes happened, but it's really helped them as far as economic development, those kinds of things. So you can see here that they've gone out and gotten more money, 41 census blocks that they bid on. It's interesting that's in Mississippi because they're based in Alabama, well, it's right next door. But I'm not sure, maybe they are the electric co-op there. Maybe they're not, I'm not sure. Then you've got 6,900 basically locations. They got $1,400 per location. Digital connections in West Virginia, $1,799 per location. M-Pulse Fiber, 2,000, what was that, 2,100. Then you got Center Wisp. So this is a Wisp. They might be doing it wireless here. Most of these are going to be doing fiber, but there's probably some wireless operators in here, and this one says Wisp. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're definitely doing it via wireless, because a lot of Wisp that bid had come out and said that, we're really going to do fiber, because there was a lot of questions from some of the fiber providers when they saw Wisp bidding, and it's like they're not going to be able to meet what they're saying they're going to be able to meet, like 1 gig service. Now you can do that if you have millimeter wave, but it's really hard to do with anything less than that. And you might be able to do it, it'd be really hard to do with mid-band spectrum even. So some of them were saying, well, we're going to do fiber most of the way, and then we're going to do wireless for the last mile kind of thing. So these guys are a Wisp, not sure what they're doing there, but 15 locations, and they're getting about $1,300 per location. We got here DMEA Utility Services. This might be a electric co-op, 3,710. They're in Colorado. See here, Cooks Hill Connect, Oklahoma. So this one doesn't, these guys are in Oklahoma, 5,000 locations, 5,500 locations, and they've only got $729 per location. So not sure what happened there. Again, I don't know if there was a lot of bidders in that area and it was bid way down and they hung in there till the end. Interstate Telecommunications, Minnesota and South Dakota, 1,700 per location. Here's another low one, really low. This is Tri-County Service Center here in Georgia, where I am. 24 census blocks, 2,900 locations, and $391 per location. So it sounds like a lot, $1 million, but 391. So I'm not sure how they're delivering. It could be that they're doing wireless. It could be that some wireless providers said, and it could be that they're doing a slower speed as well. So that maybe they were doing a lower speed, so they felt like we can do wireless, we can do a lower speed, and we can win the bid. And if you're doing wireless, then this is going to be a lot easier to do at $391 than it would be doing fiber. Shawnee Electric Co-op looks like about $2,400 there in Illinois. You got Nova Cablevision. These guys are a cable operator with just one census block that they bid in. It's got 155 locations, and they're up at $5,000 per location to get that delivered. So that's great. Coastal EMC in Georgia, $1,700 per. This one's kind of low. Imagine Networks, looks like in Ohio, 872 locations, $562 each. Midstate Services, that's pretty good. That's 7 census blocks, 96 locations. So 32. This must be. Maybe this is really rural. So again, there was a high cost aspect where you could get more money, and I wouldn't be surprised here if you've got 7 census blocks that they bid on, and in those 7 census blocks, there's census block groups. There's 32 census blocks and 96 locations. That probably means that there's very few customers per mile there. So they get 4,086. Alliance Communications, 216 locations, and they got 1,163 locations here for Advantage Cellular, and they're at 1,800 approximately. Again, very low here. So you got Skylark Broadband in New Mexico, Skylark, maybe that's Wi-Fi. Don't know. So you got 940 locations. They're getting $262 per location to do that. And then this one, $64. So this is Carolina Connect Cooperative. So this sounds like an EMC in South Carolina. 16 census blocks they bid in, 17 census block groups, 227 census blocks, 1,771 locations, but $64 per location. So they're only getting $113,631 for that. Skywave Wireless. So this sounds like a wireless operator, obviously. Again, we don't know for sure they're doing wireless. They certainly are getting a lot of money here, though. So they got 2 census blocks. But in that, so again, in these 2 census blocks, there's census block groups. There's 5 census blocks and 12 locations. So this is probably very rural, and they're getting $4,800 for that to get to each person. Inventive Wireless of Nebraska, which is interesting because the state they're going to be delivering to is Wyoming. So again, this is a fairly low amount. They've got 2 census block groups, 59 census blocks, 309 locations in there. So again, it's not that many locations, $174. And they're probably doing it wireless. So they're not, maybe they were able to bid that way down. Then you got Ideatech Telecom in Kansas, 89 locations and $265 per location. So you can see quite a difference in what some people are getting. And it may just be I'm thinking, it's whether or not it was high cost or not, and then also how long the rounds went, and whether or not, who stayed in and how many people were bidding. And to give you an idea of some of that, and some of the way people bid, there were specific tiers that people could bid on, and then there was a weight that would weigh down your bid if you bid at a slower speed and a higher latency. So, for example, here there were 4 4 tiers. There was minimum, which meant you had to at least provide 25 by 3 and 250 gigabytes of usage per month. And there's a weight on that of 50. That would weigh down your bid by 50 points. And then you had really 50 percentage points when you look at it. Then you had a baseline. This was kind of where maybe they were shooting for. RDOF, so you had 50 by 5. And remember, this is well before the Infrastructure Act that we're looking at right now. So right now, we're trying to get people to do 100 gig symmetrical if they can. So this was called the baseline then. This was the minimum definition for broadband at the time, and really still is. It hasn't been changed yet, as far as I know, by the FCC. It's still 25 by 3. And this was what they were calling baseline. And then it had a weight of 35. Then you have above baseline, that's 100 by 20. And this is now called, anything less than this is now called underserved, but this was above baseline for RDOF. 2 terabytes of usage, and that was a weight of 20. That would weigh you down by 20. And then you had gigabit service. If you're going to provide gigabit, it didn't have to be symmetrical. 100, it was a 1 gig by 500, 2 terabytes, and then there's 0 weight if you bid there. And then you've got your latency. If you were bidding low latency, that was 0 weight as well. But if you were bidding high latency, then you were weighted down by 40. And anything over 100 is really, that's a lot of latency. So most likely a wired service, and even a wireless service, should be well under 100 milliseconds. In fact, Starlink, which has got some RDOF wins out there, but they haven't been awarded any money yet, and there's a question as to whether they actually will ever get that money. But Starlink's latency is 40 milliseconds or so, so Starlink's even well below this. 750 milliseconds, that would apply to like a geosynchronous satellite. That's usually 600 to 800 milliseconds, so that would apply. That might be somebody that's in that range, over 100, but let's say under 750. So there's a big weight there. And then you had, it must be greater than or equal to 95% of all peak period round-trip latency measurements if you're looking at this latency. So this needs to be most of the time that you're getting lower than 100 milliseconds, and then they had to have a MOS score of 4 on high latency if you were going to do high latency. MOS score would be something for your phone service. So even if you're doing high latency, you had to have a good MOS score. And then I was going to show this real quick. So here's the performance tiers down here. I did a broadcast on RDOF a while back, and I will link to the part where I talk about this slide in this broadcast as well, because I talk about the math there. So if you're really a math nerd, you can listen to that. But I want to point this out. So again, depending on how people bid, if they bid in the minimum, if you remember that was 25 by 3, and they bid high latency, then they had 90 points against them. That was their weight basically. Whereas on the other end of the scale, if they bid the gigabit tier, low latency, they were at 0. And most people, I think it was over 90% of those that bid in the RDOF bid in this tier right here at gigabit low latency. So there was very few people had anything taken off of their bid. And you wonder, how can anybody actually win if that's the case? Well, it's because of the formula here. And again, I talk about that in that broadcast as to how that was all working. So a real quick review is that you've got your minimum, what's it called? Your minimum reserve price. And then that's right here. You had your reserve price and then a minimum amount that would apply to that. This is the clock. This T and L would be your performance tiers and your latency. That's your speed and that's your latency. So you got reserve price here, and basically each round you'd start out at a fairly high percentage, like well over 100%, might be 180%. So somebody who's getting let's say 50%, let's say they bid the minimum speed and low latency, they're getting 50% knocked off of that right off the top. In the first rounds, it doesn't matter because it's over 100%. So if you start out the clock factor right here, this P at 180, then everybody's on an even keel until the rounds start to continue. Then as you get below 100, then it starts to weigh in favor definitely of these gigabit providers. So anyway, I explained some of that if you're interested in that. So again, RDOF, those awards will be coming out here soon. The ones that were ready to authorize that I talked about a few days ago, those will be announced probably in 3-4 weeks, maybe. Something like that. So the FCC will get in all that paperwork, and then they'll do a notice on those, and those will be then in this same situation as these are, is that they'll be authorized, and they just, at that point, they qualify for the funds. So you can see, what I find really interesting is you can see the number of locations here that are being covered just by RDOF. So these are all locations that were considered unserved by the Infrastructure Act, or would be considered unserved by the Infrastructure Act, because anything under 25 by 3 is unserved, and these are all locations really that are less than 25 by 3. So you got Time Warner out there, you got Charter out there, you got all these other companies that are getting money now to start deploying broadband, mostly fiber, in these areas that are unserved. So every day that goes here, as RDOF continues to put out money, as ARPA continues out to give people money for broadband, as USDA Reconnect, if they put out more broadband dollars, all of these areas that are currently unserved that we thought we were going to apply this Biden bipartisan infrastructure money to, that stuff's going to be off the table. At least from the standpoint of there will be projects that are planned for those areas. Another thing that will be interesting is, right now, if you try to order fiber, just the fiber optics for your plant that you're going to build, it's like a year out. It takes a year to get that stuff because of the supply chain and the demand. So we could be sitting here a year from now where there's lots of money that people are getting ready to spend, and they've got orders in, and they haven't gotten all of the equipment in yet, and they haven't gotten all the fiber in yet. And then we've got the additional dollars are going to be coming out from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That's probably going to start hitting in 2023. That money is going to start getting allocated then to move towards the future. And then the other factor in there is the FCC is going to have their maps out. That's going to be updating where all of these unserved locations are, and how do they include stuff like this. So all of these locations are going to be served by RDOF money. So I'm thinking that when the FCC puts all these numbers together from service providers, they're going to be counting all of these locations from Time Warner, all these locations from Charter, all these other locations that are out there that we just saw. Those should all be counted as served at that point. So we'll have to see what's left at the end for all of this other infrastructure money to pay for. And anything as I mentioned the other day, I think the first priority for the bipartisan infrastructure law, the BEAD program, is that all that money is supposed to go to unserved first, which would be less than 25 by 3, and then underserved, which is less than 100 by 20, and then anchor institutions that don't have gigabit symmetrical service. And then if everything there is then covered, then all bets are off, and then they can start applying that to overbuilding. So they can then look at areas that need to be overbuilt because either the service is not that good, people are complaining, or there's only one provider, let's say, so there's not competition, prices are high, the service isn't good. So I would not be surprised if there's money left over out of this $42 or so billion that's coming, because a lot of this is going to be covered, I think, by the time we get there. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully this was helpful. It's not Tech Tuesday. I forgot to change out a screen, apparently, I guess. I did. Okay, so this is not Tech Tuesday, but same deal. So go ahead and click the subscribe button and click the little bell to be notified when I'm live. If this was helpful, go ahead and click like. I appreciate that. And I will see you next time for Broadband Deployment News. Thanks. Bye-bye.